When the day of Pentecost arrived, all the believers were gathered together in one place. Suddenly, there was a noise from the sky which sounded like strong wind blowing, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. Then they saw what looked like tongues of fire spreading out, and each person there was touched by a tongue. They were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to talk in other languages as the Spirit enabled them to speak. When they heard this noise, a large crowd gathered. They were all excited because each one of them heard the believers talking in their own language. Amazed and confused, they all kept asking each other, "What does it mean?" But others made fun of the believers, saying, "These people are drunk." Then Peter stood up with the other 11 apostles and in a loud voice began to speak to the crowd. "Fellow Jews, and all of you who live in Jerusalem, listen to me and let me tell you what this means. These people are not drunk as you suppose. It is only 9 o'clock in the morning. Rather, this is what the prophet Joel spoke about. This is what I will do in the last days, God says." I will pour out my Spirit upon all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. Yes, even on my slaves, both men and women, I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will perform miracles in the sky above and marvels on the earth below. There will be blood, fire, and thick smoke. The sun will become dark, and the moon red as blood, before the great and glorious day of the Lord arrives. And then, whoever calls on the name of God will be saved.
I dream of a day that Christians may be awakened to a new consciousness and the sense of self-identity that is sufficient to free us from the barrier that get in our way to be about our calling. With moral power and a spiritual vision, I dream that we may become architects and builders of a new world where no one needs to be marginalized and all can have hopes and dreams for a future. I dream of the day that I can achieve the level of serenity and tranquility as exemplified by Takami Sensei, whose life is obviously in true harmony with all of God's creation. He seems to have mastered the art of living in peace even in the midst of a chaotic and cruel world from which he has not removed himself. And I dream that serenity for all people.
I dream of a new global village where the vision is one of mutuality. I dream of being one of those who can walk freely as a child of God. where we can freely hand over our powerlessness and our outsiderness to the inspiration and power of God's Spirit. And the image I have is the lamb and the lion lying side by side.
Our dream is not to give up our dream in any situation.
I dream of a world in which we turn toward each other instead of away from each other, of a world where you don't care what gender I am, but you do care what kind of person I am, of a world where you don't care about what color of skin I have, but you do care about what kind of vision I have. I dream of a world where you don't laugh at me, instead you laugh with me. Most of all, I dream of a world where we move beyond our separate pasts to join hands and hearts in our shared future.
Without dreams and visions of a transformed world, there can be no hope for the present and future. I dream of a time when women and children are not the poorest of the poor, of a time when Asian and Asian American women are commonly found in the leadership of all areas of life, and most especially within the institutional church. I dream of a time when being a woman and a racial ethnic minority does not put me and my sisters at a disadvantage, of a time when our experiences, insights, images, symbols, and theologies are fully valued and represented in gatherings such as this conference.
I will teach you a song that I have learned from my American sisters, but I have modified the words of the song for this occasion. The song is something like this. We are hopeful, strong women. We are singing, singing on our way. We are hopeful, strong women. We are singing, singing for our lives. I cannot sing this song alone, so I invite all the women here to stand up and sing that song together. I will repeat the words for you. We are hopeful, strong women. We are singing, singing on our way. We are hopeful, strong women. We are singing, singing for our lives. So we sing together. We are hopeful, strong women. We are singing, singing on our way. We are hopeful, strong women. We are singing, singing for our lives. Please remain standing. As an act of affirming and covenanting with women, I would like to invite the men to stand and sing. Can I ask the men to sing, "You are hopeful, strong women. You are singing, singing on your way. You are hopeful, strong women. You are singing, singing on your way." I will give them a little help. You are hopeful, strong to join hands to sing We Are Women and Men together? We are women and men together. We are singing, singing on our way. We are women and men together. We are singing, singing for our lives. We should sing for our lives. For our lives, so we have to give more energy to the song. Then we have to sing We Are Asian and Pacific together. We are Asian and Pacific together. We are singing, singing on our way. We are Asian and together. We are singing, singing for our lives. We have come thus far together. We have come thus far together. We are singing, singing on our way. We have come thus far together. We are singing, singing for our lives. The last one, we dream side by side together. We dream side by side together. We are singing, singing on our way. We dream side by side together. We are singing, singing for our lives. I will invite you to use whatever symbol or gesture you want to use to say you are really dreaming side by side with the person next to you. Thank you.
Before we close our time of worship tonight, I noticed several of you swaying, which was a very positive sign, and we wanted to give everyone a chance to dance before we close tonight. So in the spirit of prophecy and dreaming and sharing together, I invite you to join with me in some very simple movement to the song, Spirit of the Living God. Some of you will already know this song. Several of us in the office this afternoon were doing some theologizing and decided that the words to that song, as some of us know them, really don't seem to fit too well anymore. So we have changed the words, and they will be, Spirit of the living God, rise afresh in us. We'll repeat that. And then the next part will be, move us, mold us, heal us, free us. Spirit of the living God, rise afresh in us. So those four words are move, mold, heal, and free. And the way we'll do it is Cricket is going to join me, because it was Cricket and Joseph Monte and myself who came up with these new words. So we will do a phrase with the movement, and then we would invite you just to repeat what we do. So would you please stand? Spirit
tonight, Marianne Katoppo from Indonesia.
I would like us to start by observing a few moments of silence to remember all the peoples and cultures around the Pacific, and most especially our brother Gustavo Gutierrez, who has been an unending source of inspiration and strength to so many of us and to so many people. If you have tried in those 60 seconds to inventorize all the peoples and cultures around the Pacific, then you will realize that that was an impossible task to do. And in fact, that perhaps illustrates the difficulty of what it is that we are trying to do. However, on the other hand, if in that 1 minute we tried our best to really remember and be bonded to all those people, to all of God's creation around the Pacific, then I think 60 seconds or 60,000 years will amount to the same. I would like to start with 2 quotes. One is both from people who are very far away from the Pacific. And the first one is from the outbreak of the French Revolution, when Labessière asked, "Qu'est-ce que le tiers-état?" Tout. Qu'est-ce qu'il signifie dans le monde politique? Rien. Qu'est-ce qu'il veut? Être quelque chose. What is the third estate? Everything. What does it mean in the political world? Nothing. What does it want? To be something. I think this is perhaps the yearning and the desire which is felt today by many people, especially those in what is now called the tiers-monde, the third world. The second quote is from the Danish poet and priest and martyr, Kai Munk, about 3 weeks before the Nazis came to take him away and murder him. He cried out in Our Lady's Church in Copenhagen, "The church today has lost its second most precious treasure. The first most precious treasure is Christ. The second is the spirit of martyrdom." And I think that this is also applicable to us in our situations, wherever we are. That which is called Pacific lies mainly in the third world. Both names or terms originate from the West, the so-called first world, like Adam in the Garden of Eden, the giver of names. And more often than not, words worse than the dumb beasts in the Garden of Eden, we who have been so named meekly accept them and try to fit ourselves into the cages which those names construe. How often, for example, does one need to explain that third world, tiers-monde, does not mean third-class world? It's not ordinal, it's cardinal. And it's the very fact that one has to keep explaining all the time, indicative of the mindset of the so-called first world. Now, after that very wonderful worship service, I thought it might be interesting to play a little word game. Do you know the English name for Abiyala? Hanguk? Well, Hanguk? Good to speak up. And Nippon? Yeah, of course, Myanmar, I think. Krungthep? Bangkok, yes. Junko is China. Bharat? Bharat, where is our friend from Bharat? No, it's India. Serendip? Serendip, of course, is questionable. Serendip is Sri Lanka. It's called Sri Lanka now. Aotearoa, I think we heard the other day, is New Zealand, and Nusantara is Indonesia. Well, all I wanted to show in this little word game is that, oh, you still haven't figured out where Abiyala is. I'll keep that until the end of the talk to keep you guessing. The purpose of my little word game is to show us that how often even people from these countries are forced to think of themselves as, for example, Korean, Japanese, Burmese, Bangkok citizens, Chinese, Indians, and all that, although, in fact, this is not what they call themselves. The language which we use is loaded with meaning. Would it be possible to develop our own idiom? I personally find it very difficult to speak because I know that the words which I use may have a very different meaning to you. Recapturing the language is one of our primary tasks. And to give you a small illustration of what I mean is, I'll tell you about what happened to me once in England when I was interviewed by a woman who told me that I was one of the leading black feminist theologians in the world. I told her that she should be a little more careful in her choice of adjectives, because firstly, a leader has a following, and I didn't notice any group of people following me. Secondly, my hair is black, and perhaps so is my soul, but the historical and spiritual context of what I understand to be black theology is rather different from mine. And thirdly, I never set out to be feminist, but like Topsy, I just grew. This lady was not amused, and she replied that anybody who is not European or North Atlantic white was therefore black. I was even less amused, and remarked that her logic was very similar to that of some Indonesian peasants who consider anybody who is not Indonesian or Asian to be orang Belanda, Dutch. And therefore, I have had some problems in using the word Pacific, because it's such a nice name. But today, unfortunately, it is so untrue. We could be rather romantic and remember that this vast body of water which unites and separates our countries, perhaps at one time was very peaceful, and that many of those countries also called themselves by names which describe a certain serenity and abundance, like Japan, the Blessed Isles of Yamato, Mitsuho Nakuni Yamato, or in Indonesia, Taman Sari Khatulistiwa, the garden of the equator. But in the recent past, or even not so recent, the Pacific has not been peaceful at all. It has been the battleground, the testing ground, the playground, and the dumping ground of countries which sometimes were very far removed from the area. Perhaps, if you have a chance you should look up and read the prayer which was prayed before the Enola Gay took off to drop the atom bomb on Hiroshima. And you'll get an idea of at least one view of Christian responsibility for Pacific civilization. I had the note of this prayer, but unfortunately I lost it. But as far as I remember, it says something about God guide your brave men who go through the skies to defend peace, and so on and so on. But I'm sure you can find it. If I could find it, so can you. I do not even know how to define Christian anymore. Some countries very piously put, "In God we trust," or some other religious slogan on their coins. Others may have crosses in their national flags. Are these indicators? I mean, take this place, Los Angeles. It is called after Our Lady of the Angels. The homicide rate in the quieter suburbs is 400 per annum. 10 years ago, a young cousin of mine was murdered here. And every day, 3 children are battered to death. Is America upset about that? Perhaps people hardly notice anymore what an unhealthful climate of violence they live in. But when Magic, what's his name, has tested HIV positive, that is a national tragedy. The whole evening, yesterday evening, there was nothing else on the news. Well, I sympathize with the man. I think he's very courageous and all that. But there were some other catastrophes, like, for example, the storm in the Philippines, where how many people died? 2,300, which might have been of interest. And it is remarkable, I feel, that this kind of situation occurs. And therefore, when looking at the title which was given to me, again, as a person coming from a country with an overwhelming majority of Muslims, I'm very wary of Christian triumphalism. Because where is the proof that Christians are so wonderful? Think of the riots which happened recently in Newcastle upon Tyne, England. This was the uneducated, the unemployed youth raging in the streets, raging against an uncaring society. And again, I mean, I don't mean to be picking on the United States all the time, but when I was coming over on the airplane, I read the Time magazine, and there is an article in it on the curse of coal, the plight of the coal miners of America, which is very tragic. And since we are talking about what is generally viewed as Christianity or Christendom, let me tell you about a place like Denmark, the country of Kaimuk. Denmark is the oldest Christian monarchy in Europe, the country of Søren Kierkegaard, N.F.S. Grundtvig, who founded the Folkehøjskole, the people's colleges, and of Kaimuk. As I said before, less than 1 month before the Nazis came for him and murdered him, this Danish priest, poet, and playwright said that the church has lost its second most precious treasure, the spirit of martyrdom. And what is the church without the spirit of martyrdom? The church in Denmark is a state church, the Folkekirke, and the priests are civil servants employed by the Ministry for Churches, the ministry being like a department, you know. The incidence of alcoholism is very high in Denmark and also not unknown among priests. One morning, and Kathy, it was not Pentecost, one morning at 9 a.m., 9:30 a.m., I boarded the S train at the central station in Copenhagen. I had only 5 stops to go, and at each stop, somebody would board the train with an open beer bottle in their hand and start drinking. And when I arrived at my destination and told my host about this, a little concerned, he said, well, you know why? Because the shops which sell the alcohol open at 9 o'clock. So that is why you would find them at that time in the morning. The high degree of individualism is causing a major breakdown in relationships. Known as the capital of pornography, love may be reduced to sexual calisthenics. One evening, on the regular TV news at 7 o'clock, it was showed at length a copulating couple testing out a scanner which some doctor had developed to help women have better sex. 23 couples, mostly medical students, not necessarily married to one another, had taken part in this experiment, which was duly covered by TV and press, as it was supposed to be very important to the people. With all respect to Danish missionaries doing good work overseas, I wonder whether perhaps they should pay some attention to the people at home. In Denmark, I see an illustration of what Jung meant when he said, "In every person there is a thirst for spirituality. If this thirst is not assuaged, the person dries up and shrivels inside." Perhaps we as Christians should reflect on this and ask ourselves why organized or established Christianity so often seems to manifest itself as dry intellectualism, so lacking in the vibrant, radiant, life-giving spirituality, which I think we saw a sample of, or we experienced a sample of this evening. Let us also remember that Christianity came to China twice before the advent of the West European missionaries, and it also disappeared twice. Without the props of technology and cash flow, Christianity apparently could not compete with the highly developed ethical and value systems that were already present. At this point, let me say something about myself to make my position more clear. I'm not going to say very much more about Indonesia than what I have said before, that it has an overwhelming Muslim majority. In fact, it has the largest Muslim population in the world. That is about 160 million, which constitute about 87.5% of the population. 10%, so about 18 million, are Christian. The rest are Buddhist, Hindus, and so-called Javanese mystics. Those who will want to know more about Indonesia's geographical position, history, culture, flora, and fauna will please consult their encyclopedias, because it's absolutely impossible to say something meaningful about Indonesia in 50 words. And after all, when you're from the United States or from England, you don't tell us where it is and who lives there and what the situation is, because you assume that we already know about it. And like I said, if we can read newspapers and encyclopedias and look at atlases, so can others. Some exotic facts about Indonesia. The Pithecanthropus erectus, or Java man, which was discovered in 1890, has been scientifically proven to be among the earliest evidence of human life. It's 1 million years old. The Borobudur, which is the largest Buddhist monument in the world, situated near Yogyakarta, was built between 778 and 856. That is 200 years before Notre Dame in Paris. There is also an abundance of wildlife in Indonesia. There are elephants, rhinoceros, orangutans, tigers, birds of paradise, and dragons. I told somebody once that, well, Indonesia is quite special because, would you believe it? We have dragons. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, yes, I believe it. It is a country, Indonesia is a country of great variety, multicultural and multilingual. I come from the Minahasa in North Sulawesi, near the Philippines, where the majority of the people are Christian, many since the days of the Spanish Empire. My family on both sides have been academics for several generations. My mother originally coming to Batavia, the Dutch name for Jakarta, in 1925 to study pharmacy, but then she met my father, who had other plans for their future. My father was the first Indonesian to qualify for the Hoofdakte, or the Dutch teacher certificate, and went on to become one of Indonesia's foremost educators. I am the 10th child, the 5th daughter, and I was born in the middle of World War II, during the Japanese occupation of Indonesia, when times were hard. But my parents loved children, and they were happy when I was born. Even though to others it might seem that the odds were against me, I have never felt unwelcome. In our family, it was the boys who often felt that they should apply for an equal rights amendment. When I was 3 months old, American planes destroyed our house during one of the all too frequent bombing raids. So we had to live on the plantation until the end of the war. Then my father was posted to Makassar, and later which is in South Sulawesi, and later to Jakarta on Java, which means that I had to cope with 2 major culture shocks before I was 7. My father, being the person he was, we grew up steeped in European culture on one hand, and Indonesian on the other. We read both Ibsen and Shakespeare and Joost van Vondel, the Dutch poet, as well as the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and the Hikayat Abdullah, an old Malay classic. We listened to Grieg and other of those European composers, as well as to the Balinese gamelan. But first and foremost, our father taught us to be primary thinkers, not just to challenge ready-made answers, but also to formulate the questions ourselves, not just to gather and to study the information available, but moreover, to look beyond the obvious. It was thus that my father managed to uncover an 18th century hero, Nuku, Sultan of Tidore, who had been blacked out by the Dutch and erased from their history. My father's book on Nuku was instrumental in restoring this forgotten prince to the Indonesian gallery of the Heroes of Freedom. And en passant, my father also drew attention to the fact that the author of Max Havelaar, a famous Dutch book which changed at least the policy of the Dutch colonial government, the author of Max Havelaar had served in the Dutch colonial administrator's office in the 1850s in Amboina. And this is very significant because the most dramatic part of the novel Max Havelaar is to be found in his speech to the chieftains of Lebak, West Java. It is an impassioned plea to native and foreign administrators alike to stop their collusion of exploiting and oppressing the poor people, that is, the peasants. My father showed that this speech in Max Havelaar bears a remarkable resemblance to one which was held by Goldbach, assistant resident of the Moluccas, in 1804, 50 years before Multatuli wrote the book. My father thus proved that the ethical message which resounded in Goldbach's or Max Havelaar's speech sprang directly from the compassionate heart of a person who is unable to tolerate the injustice of the society and who tries to see and to act in order to change it. It was not necessarily, Max Havelaar's speech was not necessarily the result of certain political changes and shifts in ways of thinking in Europe of the mid-19th century, as some critics were fond of saying. To my mind, the reason why I mentioned Max Havelaar is because it is the ongoing collusion of local and expatriate persons which impoverish the people in our countries, which is the problem which we have to address if we want to talk about Christian responsibility for Pacific civilization. What is the world's most pressing problem today? What is the most pressing problem of the Pacific? It is poverty. As responsible persons and as Christians, we should be informed. There is absolutely no excuse why we should not know what is going on. The World Bank's, the much maligned World Bank's 13th annual report, 1990, which is called the World Development Report, states that 1/3 of people in the developing world live in poverty. That means more than 1 billion people, almost 3/4 of which live in South Asia and East Asia. 46.4% live in South Asia, and 25%, mostly Chinese, live in East Asia. To be poor means to earn less than 370 American dollars per year. In Indonesia, the minimum wage was recently set at 2,100 per day, which is about $1.10 or $1.15. And some entrepreneurs still complain that it is too high. They cannot make a profit. In South Asia, there are 520 million poor, which is 51% of the total poor. And in East Asia, 280 million, or 20%, are poor, the majority of which are in China. Now, statistics can be quite overwhelming, but if you think what is the population of the United States, and then try to see how many poor people there are in the world, then you can get a picture. Life expectancy in South Asia is 56, in India it's 57. In East Asia it's 67, in China 69. Safe water, which we feel is, which we take for granted, is available in India to only 50% of the population. Now 50% of the population in India is about the entire population of Western Europe. So that is the amount of people which have to do without safe water. In the Philippines, 54%, in Indonesia, 36%, Thailand, 66%, Malaysia, 76%. One of the indicators of welfare or progress is called MMR, maternal mortality rate. And it is very high in the developing world. I know that in Indonesia, it is the highest next to Nepal. As it is, 500,000 women die each year in the third world. The main 5 causes die in childbirth, or because of childbirth or pregnancy in the third world. And the main 5 causes are hemorrhage, 75%, infection, toxemia, obstructed labor, abortion. All of these deaths are easily preventable if there really is a political will and a commitment for safe motherhood. 10 million young adults, that is between age 15 and 20, die every year from respiratory diseases, malaria, diarrhea, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, lung diseases, sexually transmitted diseases, diabetes, tuberculosis, and injuries. Every 7 seconds, a child dies. In Iraq, this year, before the end of this year, 1 million children will have died in the aftermath of the Gulf War because the infrastructure has been so destroyed. And it is here that, again, I think of Gustavo Gutierrez, quoting Bartolomé de las Casas, the unjust death of millions before their time. It is the face of the suffering Christ which we see in the faces of these millions cut short before their time. The pain and the humiliation of those millions who have to struggle for survival under the most inhuman conditions is the pain and humiliation of Christ. How many of people from other countries, even especially those in the West, how many people see Thailand, for example, as a country of ancient culture and history? When coming over on the plane to Bangkok, an American woman told me that she was very embarrassed because most of the other passengers were men. And of course, most of them know about Thailand is Bangkok and Pat Pong Road, the famous prostitution district. Yet, Pat Pong Road is less than 25 years old. The first massage parlor to be opened there was Japanese, employing Japanese women because Thai women refused to work in this kind of place. Now, what has happened to break the spirit of the Thai women, of which about 1 million are supposed to be involved in prostitution today? As an Asian woman, I was glad that Aung San Suu Kyi was awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace. I was glad not just because she's a great woman who eminently deserves this, but also because maybe this way, the image of the Asian woman as the prostitute will be erased. We read Luke 4, verse 18 to 19 in the opening worship. Is it not perhaps our Christian responsibility to bring the resurrected Christ into the lives of our suffering people? Not in a triumphalistic manner, but humbly, as he himself is humble. And is it not our task, through Christ's presence, to fight to end all forms of human bondage? This perhaps might sound easier to say than to do. And again, I am not very sure that it is the first priority on the agenda of Christian churches in the world or even around the Pacific. In my experience, what often happens is that instead of really being informed about issues and about reasons and causes, we tend to become very program-oriented and look for results. And with all respect and apologies to, for example, the organizers of this meeting, we were supposed to have written and handed in our papers in August. Now, I understand your position that you would like to have a finished product in August, but this is November, and 3 months later, so much has already changed, is constantly changing in the world scene or on the Asian scene. And it occurred to me that if perhaps one has a meaningful dialogue, it is the same like eating food. Here in the West, you are used to eat frozen food, which may be, well, not hundreds of years old, but rather old. Whereas in Asian countries, especially the more tropical one, like Indonesia, we always eat food which has been freshly prepared. And I think it should be the same way also with whatever we discuss or whatever we present. And therefore, I think that perhaps the mode of our doing theology or the mode of our meeting here would bear to be, it would be possible to look into the mode of doing theology or having meetings. If it has to follow a certain program, like I said, if we're program-oriented, and please have your paper in August 10, and then you deliver it on November, 9? And there is such, not as a jet lag, there is a real lag, and that is not the real situation in Asia. And also, we must really be able to listen to one another and to speak and to act courageously and constructively, because there lies our responsibility. One of the things which my father also always told us is that, remember, he was a true Calvinist in that sense. Remember, you should never be so proud of what you can do and what you are able to do, because God has given you your talents, and when you try to do whatever you can, it is only fulfilling God's work. And the one which should be remembered and which should be praised is God, not you. And also, he said, you will find that you will have to make a choice between being popular and being respected. If you want to be popular, then of course you will say all the things which people really want to hear, which will fit nicely into the preconceived notions. But if you want to be respected, then you do what you think is right, even though that may mean that you will not always get the most friendly remarks or feelings directed your way. And I have found that In Indonesia, for example, the church seems far too accommodating with instead of acting or speaking up in certain situations. And I find there is also a certain collusion sometimes with certain bodies overseas who perhaps feel that it is their aim in life to have as many converts to Christianity as possible. And I think that this is not what I look upon as Christian responsibility. And as I'm saying this, perhaps I should mention again, as I said a few days ago when we introduced ourselves, lately I have not really been active as a theologian, mainly because my idea perhaps of Christian responsibility or the prophetic role of the church is not that of some of the church fathers or even some of the church mothers. And I have been active mainly as a writer and a person involved in literature. And to me, it is always a great challenge to find outside the narrow confines of the church or Christianity so much of the Spirit at work. And I'm really sharing this with you because I feel it is really time for us to be brave enough to break out and to burst out of our narrow models and structures, like the dance earlier this evening showed us, to be set truly ablaze with the Spirit, because it is not ideology or human ambition that is moving us. It is the Holy Spirit, the giver of life. In John 10, verse 10, Jesus says, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And that the Pacific, the countries around the Pacific, and even the whole world, that the Pacific may truly be an ocean of peace, and that the peoples around it may have life in abundance. That is our Christian responsibility. Thank you.
I appreciate very much the presentation that we have heard from Marianne. And I received the paper at the same time that you received, so it's fresh food, not frozen one. And I certainly like listening to the presentation. It's a kind of style that is very agreeable with me. A little bit biographical, also anecdotic. I think that there are some very provocative thoughts and presentation, kind of incisive critiques to certain common accepted practices in the West. It's also concrete, clear, and has given us, a basic for further reflection. Some remarks about the content of this paper. I certainly agree wholeheartedly with the concern and reservations about the use of different labels that we supposedly underdeveloped or immature or whatever other name need to receive from those who tend to believe themselves to be smarter, therefore they can tell us what we are. Third world. This was a very kind of nasty way of labeling, 2/3 of the world people, population. And obviously, as a shorthand, many of us at a certain point accepted the name not because we were pleased with it, but because, well, it was the accepted way of describing a certain group of countries. But I don't know many people in the so-called third world that were really pleased with this way of describing us. Again, I think that was Charles de Gaulle, the one who coined the phrase third world without ever being very explicit about who was the second world. We heard a lot about the first and the third, and we assume that the second one is the one that is crumbling down at this point of history. So I think that we need to be very careful in accepting, the names, titles, labels that are put on us. And in my own presentation, I'll make some brief remarks about the tendency that we all have of receiving labels in the world. I also empathize very much with the insistence on language. I think language is a very important element in cultural preservation. Being Hispanic, living at the present moment in the United States, I'm very much aware of the campaign that is going on about English only. Of course, you will think that this will affect all different languages that are spoken at the present moment in the States. True. But the arrow is really targeting the Hispanic community. Spanish is the only real viable language in North America today. 25 million people are Hispanics, and the communication between the North and the South is always very fluid. People are going back and forth. We maintain our relationship with our families. Our grandsons and granddaughters need to keep the language alive in order to communicate with abuela y abuelo in the other side of the line. Yes, English only is a very subtle way of expressing a racist approach. Language per se is not wrong. Even accent per se is not wrong. When the language and the accent relate to the Hispanic people, then something is wrong. You have a French accent, you are cute, you are romantic, you sound so nice. If you have a German accent, maybe you can be a Secretary of State. But if you have a Spanish accent, that means you are a second-class citizen. I'm looking forward to the time when you people here in the United States will be able to learn, and even forced to learn, other language than just English. The time that you get along, being monolingual is passing very quickly. It's about time that you take language learning more seriously. And this is an excellent way of also being more respectful to another culture. Learning a language is much more than just learning words. It's more than learning, something from a dictionary. Learning a different language is entering in a new world. It's getting a different worldview. It's understanding something that happened, to people that speak primarily that language. I think that our sensitivity will grow tremendously in relationship to other peoples and other cultures when we are struggling in order to learn the way that they speak and to perceive the world in the way that they perceive it. So we will not give up our language, and I hope that nobody is going to be forced to give up his or her language in any place of the world. We need to preserve what we have had. Our languages reflect our culture and are certainly part of our histories. I found very interesting also the remark that is made in the paper in relationship to the discovery or rediscovery of the importance of history made by the father of Marianne, kind of digging out this 18th century hero, Nuka Sultan of Tidore. We were talking this afternoon And I think that is a very important topic in our conversation and should be a very important topic in our future deliberations about the importance of recovering our real histories, digging out those persons that have been silenced, that has been taken out by the official writers of history. We all know it. History so far has always been written from the perspective of the winners. Those who were losers didn't have any right to write their own history. So there is no wonder that so many important events, the participation of the suffering people, is not present in the histories that we have learned in our schools. Looks like only generals, kings, queens are important. The common people are not present. It is an imperative for all of us in the Pacific realm, the Pacific Basin, for us here to try to rewrite our history, to recover our own memories, in order to do justice to those who have struggled before us, and we will find out that we have not been without witness in the same line. Part of the history that has been also recorded in this paper reminds me of our own history in Latin America. When the reference is made to the novel Max Havelaar, what happened there and the type of speech that was given by a concrete human being that was very much concerned about the mistreatment that the local people were receiving. I was thinking about those priests, friars in the 16th century that came from Spain to be kind of the soft side of a cruel conquest, and how they were converted through the suffering of the people. Fray Bartolomé de las Casas, Montesino, and many others that finally were clearly in the sides of the Indian community, the native population in Latin America. Yes, there was a clear indignation about the abuses that were perpetrated against those whom for more than 50 years the right to possess their own souls was denied by the official theologian of the Crown of Spain. If the Indian didn't have souls and were kind of half human, half brutes or animals, it was okay for us to use and abuse them. And if they died, they can be replaced by other people that were equally marked to do brutal work and not to live as persons. So I can empathize and relate to that part of the paper also. When Marianne pointed out in unequivocal terms that the real issue for Indonesia, the real issue for the Pacific, and maybe the real issue for a great number of people in the world is poverty, I think that she certainly hit the nail on the head. Poverty is a real issue. I remember way back in 1962, I think, in a consultation on habitat in Stockholm, Indira Gandhi said, "Nothing pollutes more than poverty." And I think that still, if we understand correctly what she meant, I think that is right. Pollution and other things are really corroding the well-being, the natural well-being of our nature, our world. And poverty need to be described in very concrete terms, and I also appreciate this. When the paper said that poor is anybody that makes less than $370, we need to put a dollar sign there. And I said this because I attended many, many conferences, not only in Latin America, but in different parts of the world, where we can enter very easily in a long discussion about who are the poor. And we try to spiritualize, like Matthew may be those poor in spirit. Even in one occasion, somebody said, well, we need to be careful because I consider Yacoca, Maybe you don't know, Iacocca is the president of Chrysler Corporation. To be a very poor Iacocca, all the many problems, the company is almost collapsing. Then when we include Iacocca that makes more than $10 million a year, plus share participation and other things, among the poor we are certainly confused. And in one occasion, a poor, in a conference when we were discussing one of these issues, stood up and said, I don't know why you have so much problem defining who the poor are or who is poor. But if you put a group of poor people together, they don't have any problem defining right now who the rich are. And I think that that's something that we need to bear in mind. Don't try to spiritualize and kind of condition. Poverty is a reality. A poor person is the one that cannot make ends meet. A poor person is the person that doesn't have any freedom of option, that is stuck in the mud. Some of us have a struggle at a certain point in our lives with this issue. If we were not born in poverty, how we can really identify with the poor and the oppressed? The tendency and the temptation and maybe the easy way out was to give up whatever you have and go and live with and like the poor. In my own situation in Chile, where some of these poor who enlightened me about it, you can be a poor for a while or even for the rest of your life, but that's going to be your decision and your election. We are poor because we cannot do otherwise. So, is this a consolation for us to enjoy wealth and to get greedy? Certainly not. There is a style of life that is demanding from us in solidarity. And we need to find concrete ways to express our concern and our identity with the poor and the oppressed. But at the same time, we need to be realistic and don't kid ourselves that we can really suffer in the way that the poor are suffering when we make an option, temporary or permanent, on their behalf. Yes, 1/3 of the world is living in poverty. We can use different kind of indices to measure that. The Development Council in Washington has developed some time ago already the Physical Quality of Life Index, in order to include several ingredients, several components, and to measure. And one thing at least we have learned through this way of measuring poverty, that the quality of life index is not related or correlated exactly with the amount of money that is available for different countries. Countries with a per capita income higher do have a quality of life inferior to other countries. And one of the examples, that always stick to my mind was the situation in Sri Lanka. With a very low per capita income, Sri Lanka has a very high quality of life index. The internal distribution of wealth make quite a difference. And we need to be aware that only the amount of money that the country has doesn't say much. I was impressed in this regard in our own Latin American situation, what Cuba was able to accomplish with a per capita income that was always small, low. Cuba was never one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America. Venezuela, Mexico, Chile, Argentina, they have a much higher per capita income than Cuba. Nevertheless, every time that I visit the island since 1958, pre-Castro, 60, 62, and many times after that, I was impressed by the real concrete progress that was done in health services, in the distribution of food, not that many, but good distribution. The way that kids were all in school, not begging, maybe asking for a chewing gum or a pencil here and there, but not begging for money. Healthy kids, the way that people with some problems were treated. Mentally disturbed persons were not abandoned, but they were re-educated and really incorporated in the life of the people. It is possible to do a lot with not much if there is the will, if there is the intention. So I think that we need to think very concretely about poverty. And for me, maybe here is my own Christian background and my kind of theological background. Poverty and the poor are not only concepts, not even sociological realities. The dimension of poverty in the world is a religious, a spiritual reality. I think that there is a very clear connotation or relationship in the biblical record between the poor, the poverty, and what happened in our spiritual experience. It's only when we turn away from the righteous God, the God that demands my responsibility for my brother and sister, when idolatry enter into the picture of the world, that we start being unjust with one another. Because I turn my back to my God, I can also exploit my brother and my sister. And poverty is the result of this exploitation. It was a Chinese theologian that taught me in a very clear way, that you are not only poor, you are impoverished. You are the one who have sinned against. So I think that we need to be concerned with the poor, be informed, and be clear that when we enter in a kind of frontal attack on poverty, we are involved in a very spiritual issue. I can identify with some of the indicators that were mentioned. Every time that I'm in Central America, that I visit Nicaragua, I feel absolutely kind of astounded when still 52% of the children that die in Nicaragua died out of diarrhea. Nobody should die of diarrhea nowadays. And we can go on in different countries at the same situation. Respiratory diseases are also increasing in Latin America. With the pollution that is going on in Mexico City today, it's a miracle that people can really reach a medium age in the next century. According to some indicators, to just live in Mexico City one day is equal to smoke 2 packages of cigarettes every day. So talking about smoking or not smoking, the situation is really bad. I also agree wholeheartedly with the proposal in this paper that our responsibility is to end all forms of human bondage. Yes, we need to struggle in that direction. We need to take our job seriously. And of course here, our churches bear responsibilities. In Latin America, as in Indonesia and in other places, sometimes churches have been complacent, even willing to go hand in hand with oppressive regime and oppressive situation. But here and there, by the grace of God and the action of the Holy Spirit, we are seeing people that stand up and start awakening the consciousness of the church, and communities start moving and things start changing. And we cannot say, obviously, that in Latin America or in any other place we have arrived to a church that is clearly committed, clearly identified with the cause of the poor and the oppressed, but at least there are clear signs that many are moving in that direction. We need to speak and act courageously, constructively. Yes, I think that to speak and to act, and maybe to recover, to go back to the beginning of the paper, the need of martyrdom, to die. This is also something that the Latin American church has been recovering. We have had hundreds and hundreds of martyrs in Latin America in the last 20 years. We have heard of the most famous ones. The smallest country in Central America, El Salvador, has given us many martyrs. The most well-known, Don Oscar Arnulfo Romero, the Archbishop of San Salvador, but also some dear friends, member of the Central American University, Ignacio Yacuría, great theologian, great friend, humble person, moving from Spain to Latin America to live, to identify, and to die for the sake of those little ones that at this point cannot fend for themselves. Yes, a faithful church will be a suffering church. And sometimes I wonder if we in our countries, we in our situations are really ready to pay the price of speaking and acting courageously. I hope that our conversation and exchange and mutual encouragement in this gathering will help us to face more realistically what is our task ahead. If we want to follow in the one that say, I came in order that you may have life and have it abundantly. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Marianne has not been well, and so we're very delighted that you have recovered and were with us tonight to give us this inspiring paper. And Joel, thank you very much for your response. We have been dreaming and prophesying tonight, and I think that each of these speakers have helped clarify what our dream and the direction of our prophetic voice in the days to come. We have a nice amount of time, plenty of time to have some questions now. Who would like to ask the first question? Okay, Santiago?
I'd like to ask a question of Marianne. It really goes back to the question that she asked of Lily regarding our Muslim brothers and sisters in the Philippines. Given your talk, you mentioned the fact that a higher percentage of the Indonesians are actually Muslims. My question really has something to do with the Christian and Muslim relationships in Indonesia. I wonder whether you could speak to that.
Well, Indonesia, as you may know, is a country where most of the people are quite easygoing, very, like I said, most of the people, tolerant. And the quality of Indonesian Islam is also such that there has always been a great amount of tolerance. If you look at the very fact that the national airline, the flag carrier, is called Garuda. And Garuda, of course, has now been appropriated by Indonesia as the national symbol, but originally Garuda is the eagle which carries Lord Vishnu in Hindu mythology. So it would almost be like having, let us say, if the state of the Vatican had an airline, if they called it John Calvin or Martin Luther airline. But on the whole, person to person, there have been a great amount of good relations, and there's also quite a lot of intermarriage. I have several cousins or other relatives who are Muslims. And in some parts of Indonesia, like in the Moluccas, which I mentioned earlier, there is a very interesting system, which is called the Pela system. It is a kinship solidarity system. And this always involves one Muslim village and one Christian village, or two Muslim villages and two Christian villages. But it's a very old system which grew out of the fact that when the Moluccas, well, about a couple of hundreds of years ago, there was an equal amount of Christians as of Muslims in the Moluccas. And so naturally, they sorted out things this way, that they created a kind of kinship support system. And then they just accepted the fact that one is Muslim, one is Christian. However, the people of Indonesia are, Indonesia is a vast country and the people are very varied. So we have had in some parts of Indonesia, like in South Sulawesi and also in northern Aceh and in, well, some other parts of Sumatra, some Muslim insurrection or attempt to create a Muslim Islamic State. But one must remember that these are small groups or the more fanatic elements. And as I said, on the whole, there are very good relationships. There has been lately a kind of policy of the government, who likes to have everything very neatly arranged, that there should be a special organization for Christian intellectuals and a special organization for Muslim intellectuals, and that interreligious dialogue should go through the Ministry of Religion, so that people in fact become rather compartmentalized. But earlier this year, during the Muslim fast, some people got together, many Catholic priests and also some Muslim leaders and a few Protestants, including myself, and we established something which we called the Forum Democracy, the Forum for Democracy, where we tried to have a kind of meeting place, or a forum, as the name says, where we could discuss together the matters which relate to democracy, because we tried to show that even though we have all the instruments of democracy, this does not mean that democracy is necessarily implemented, which of course some people in the government were not very happy about. But it is interesting that, and it's typical for Indonesia, that this kind of forum could be created spontaneously, that Muslims and Christians and Hindus and Buddhists come together and think of some way to, well, make some impact on society. And of course, in the legislation, lately there have been some problems because in the past, intermarriage was quite easy. But now, it is demanded that when people of different religions get married, it must not be against the teachings or the rules of either religion, which means that invariably somebody has to convert. And still, Indonesia is in a much better situation than Malaysia, and this is something which I think needs to be said over and over again, because in Malaysia, as you may know, it's an Islamic state, and they even have the law or the rule that all Malays, so all indigenous people, should be Muslims, except for those from Sarawak, Borneo. But all Malays otherwise should be Muslims, because Islam is supposed to be the religion of the Malay. Now, the term Malay is very misleading because, of course, all the inhabitants of these archipelagos, whether you call it Philippines, 7,000 islands, or Indonesia, 13,000 islands, everybody is can be described as Malay. So in Indonesia, if this kind of rule applied, it means that 99% of the Indonesian church would go out of business, because in Malaysia, it's only like Chinese, Indian, European ancestry who can be another religion than Islam. Whereas in Indonesia, we have freedom of religion, and we don't have this restriction. However, I cannot deny that in spite of the very good relations, there are certain elements which are aided and abetted by forces abroad who want nothing more than having an Islamic state. set up in Indonesia. But you see, when we talk about Islam, we must remember that it is not a monolith. There are many different kinds of Muslims, even within the same country or within the same school. Because one question people often ask is, are the Muslims in Indonesia Shiites or Sunnites? I said, well, they're Sunnites, but that is not the real point. I mean, it is not so much the teaching, because there are Protestants and Protestants, and there are Catholics and Catholics. So Islam is not a monolith, but I personally find that there are many of the values in Islam which are expressed, for example, through the schooling system, which the Nahdlatul Ulama, one of the largest Muslim organizations, set up years ago. And these values are very meaningful. And these schools are called the pesantren, the centers. It's like a center where a group of students and a teacher live together. And you might be interested to know, especially those with Cuernavaca connections, that Ivan Illich told me that he took much of his inspiration of this schooling society precisely after having lived for 6 months in a pesantren, in a Quranic school. Because the teachings in those Quranic schools are very much, life-preserving and non-competitive, pacific, and that kind of thing. But then again, that is one of the best parts, the best expressions of Islam. And we must not confuse it with some of the more fanatical elements which are also present. As I told you, it is impossible really to say something about Indonesia or Indonesian Islam, for that matter, in a couple of sentences. But I could say that on the whole, I feel quite confident that there can be a good relationship even in the future. I do see, however, that from outside there is often an attempt to stir up things or to distort things. Like I told you about the Forum for Democracy, which actually made a lot of headlines and was even written about in some European and perhaps also American, I'm not aware of that, but in some European magazines and papers. And there was one article in the reputable British journal, The Economist, which wrote about which presented the Forum for Democracy as if it was a totally Muslim, how do you call it, a totally Muslim baby, as if there is a man, Abdurrahman Wahid, a great Muslim leader, who is indeed the one who was had the highest profile and is the most inspiring of all the members of this Forum for Democracy. But the forum was born out of a consultation which was held by a group including Catholic priests and people like myself. So it is not a Muslim project. But The Economist presented it as if it were really one of those new Muslim setups. So I wrote a letter to The Economist and I explained that as a founding member of the Forum for Democracy and as the secretary of the working group, the only woman, I could vouch for the fact that it could be called an interreligious thing, and that at the opening of the office, a small house which somebody had donated to the forum, at the opening of the office, we thought of one symbolic act, and I'm sure you will never guess what that was. We had obtained a copy of a very, very famous democratic document and framed it, and our symbolic act to open this, or to inaugurate this office of the Forum for Democracy was to carry it into the main meeting room and to hang it on the wall. And this famous democratic government is called the Magna Carta. So I thought that the Economist would appreciate that. I got a very nice letter from the editor in which he said that I had probably missed the point which the British journalist writing about the Forum for Democracy was making. So you see, I mean, this is the same syndrome of when we try to explain who we are, because we are being misrepresented, and then we are told that, unfortunately, madam, it seems you have missed our point altogether. So I hope I haven't missed your point.
Marianne, this morning we have been talking about this Minzhong critique of Asian religions. So I wondered if there are women's groups in Indonesia who are doing some critique on Islam. And also, can you share with us some of your observation how women live in a Muslim country?
Well, women's groups in the church, I'm not aware of any groups. I know there are one or two students. There is at least one woman student, graduate of the theological seminary, who is taking Islam and studying under a very able Islamologist, a German scholar. But this is precisely what I am so concerned about in Indonesia, that there is too little interest to be informed. And as I had wanted to mention somewhere, but left out, to be bonded. Because whether the others are Muslim or Hindu or whatever, we share the same space and the same history. So it would be good to reach out to each other and to, as somebody expressed this evening, to turn to each other rather than from each other. But these groups, as far as I know, do not exist in the Christian church in Indonesia. And as for the, I would have liked if there were some groups, because the Quranic schools which I described, there are some which are 100% female, I mean, which are just women. And they have evolved a very interesting type of thinking. And it is also in these Quranic schools that liberation theology is flourishing, and the books which come out of Latin America and other places are really being accepted enthusiastically. Now, if you ask about the way of life of Muslim women, again, Indonesia is so multicultural, it is difficult to say. But ever since the Iran revolution, I have noticed that suddenly a lot of young women are wearing the veil, which they did not do before. And you can distinguish in Indonesia about two groups of Muslims, different, the ones which we call the Santri, which are the holy ones. Remember, the Pesantren, the name for the Quranic schools, originally comes from Santri. Santri means holy. So the Santri people are the holy ones, meaning the ones who pray 5 times a day and who observe all the rules like fast and all that. But it's interesting that many of the so-called Santri don't wear the veil. Because like this leader who I mentioned before, Abdurrahman Wahid, he said that in his opinion, the veil has nothing to do with Islam. It is a Levantine custom. And I think he is correct. Because you see in Greece and in Spain and in Italy, women also cover their heads. So he and other people feel that it's cultural, this dressing the way Khomeini used to think women should be dressed. So you can also distinguish among the Muslim women, there are those who are, say, Western educated, especially of the older generation, and who are in many ways rather westernized, have also gone to Christian schools mostly, because the Christian schools, private schools, are supposed to be the best. And then you have also the more traditional type. But I can assure you that on the whole, the Indonesian Muslim woman or Muslimat she would be called, is very outgoing and open-minded, and certainly not willing to be shut up in closed quarters. And we also think that our hope, those people of us who are not Muslims in Indonesia, we always feel that our hope for the future is the very fact that the Indonesian Islam is so tolerant and so special, also wanting to enculturate a lot of different aspects. So I think that some of the most dynamic women whom I know, and I'm glad that you mentioned that you'll ask that question, some of the most dynamic women I know are some of the Muslim women, and one of them is involved in this Committee for Asian Women, which published this book, which I wanted to show to you, Many Paths, One Goal. And it is about organizing women workers in Asia, and it gives a lot of the facts about the constraints and the hindrances which women workers meet. And as I said, it is interesting to me that the one who is most involved in this kind of thing is a Muslim woman, not a Christian woman. Although I'm not saying that there are no Christian women involved, but this is, I think, one of the greatest problems also to me personally, that in Indonesia, unfortunately, very often the Christian women are not very concerned about the plight of the women workers. A few months ago, it was at the end of the Muslim fast, some women workers stormed a factory owned by Koreans because they had not been given the bonus pay which they had been promised. And this is really what you would call in Minjung theology, the Han of the women, you know, because normally they are so quiet and docile, but this is the great holiday of the year when they were entitled to receive a big, not that big, just the double amount of what they get, but a bonus. And the unfortunately Korean Christian owners of the factory thought that no, this is too much to give to those workers, and so the women exploded and stormed the factory. And of course, what happened is that, in fact, they are worse off than they were before because they cannot unionize, and the ones who stormed the factory were taken to be ringleaders and imprisoned. And there is still a lot of discussion going on about that. A lot of foreign diplomats put it on top of their priority list to go and see the situation of those women or to talk about it, but not the Church Women United or whatever it's called in Indonesia.
Just a technical question here. What does Abiyala?
I thought nobody would ask, you know. I was thinking, gosh, no problem. Well, surely you have guessed. Next year, there were going to be big celebrations, and some people are going to demonstrate because they do not feel that the 500th, invasion of Abiyala should be celebrated. Well, I got it from some of my friends in South America, in Ecuador. I mean, I wasn't in Ecuador, but some of my friends from Ecuador, and they use it in the literature which they sent out, you know, to protest or to conscientize people about this 500th celebration. So my friends told me that Abiyala means the land of the corn, but I forgot which language it is. I don't know whether, well, is it? You knew it. Is it? Land.
I just have a hunch that if it means the land of the
Land of the Corn, yes. Yes, oh, there you are. So, as I said, I thought it was very nice because it linked up also with, as I said, without trying to be overly romantic, but Japan once was called Mitsuhona Kuni Yamato, you know, the Blessed Isles of Yamato, and then this whole beautiful continent was called Abiyala, Land of the Corn. So there are so many names which the people themselves gave to the countries around the Pacific, which unfortunately now are not true anymore. And that is, I think, one of the concerns which we may have to restore Abiyala to its proper meaning. But did nobody ever hear it before? So it seems that the literature has not reached you, because there was a lot of this. I forgot what it is called. Some centers and some organizations which work to inform people about the what you call it, the crazy idea of. Anyway, they protest against this 500th anniversary business.
That idea has come down to us. I mean, some of us have been part of that, but not from the point of view with Abiyala. That's very enlightening.
Yes, I think it's one of the things which they took up. So, like I said, I'm grateful if you tell me it's Quechuan, because I forgot. It is mentioned in that literature which language it's originally derived from.
I have a follow-up question on language. Is there a name, either in Indonesian or in the Philippine language, that tries to encompass the water body that we have labeled, or our Spanish ancestors labeled Pacific?
Well, actually, not the, from Indonesian perspective, the part which is facing or bordering the the Pacific, is not so large as compared to the Indian Ocean. Because the name which we have for the Pacific is just the translation of the idea, Lautan Teduh, so the quiet or the tranquil ocean. So it's a translation. But the major coastline of Indonesia is on the Indian Ocean, and actually in Indonesia, or at least on the island of Java, there is the belief that the Indian Ocean, which in our atlases is called the Indonesian Ocean, well, because somebody figured out that the coastline, the Indonesian coastline, is longer than the Indian coastline. But not only that, in the old tradition and old belief, at least on the island of Java, but in other places, this ocean is ruled by a being who is called the Queen of the South. And the Queen of the South is a very powerful, you could say goddess figure or Magna Mater figure, who has as her aim to protect the islands, the people, the animals, and it is interesting that the belief in this queen is so real that, for example, there's a small city on the southern coast of West Java which is called Pelabuhan Ratu, literally meaning the harbor of the queen. There is a big 5-star hotel there. I think it's about 6 or 7 stories high. And in that hotel, there is a special room, which is the Queen's room. And nobody else is supposed to go in there unless you have a specific request or question to meditate on or to ask her. And you would be surprised to know how many of leading government people, whichever religion, come to that room to ask the blessing or the guidance of the Queen. And it is in the sayings attributed to this Queen, where the phrase Taman Sari Khatulistiwa, I think that is the garden of the equator occurs, where Indonesia is portrayed as a beautiful garden, where all the other nations, it's almost like the tree in Revelations, all the others can come and have their fill from this garden. So if the Indian Ocean could have been, with some poetical license, be included in the Pacific, then I would have said something about the Queen of the South. But I'm glad that now you gave me a chance to do so. Because for most Indonesians, I think the Indian Ocean was the ocean which they knew. Many of the people from Sulawesi were great sailors, the Buginese, because the Buginese, they sailed all the way to Madagascar. So, but we are not aware of them sailing the other direction.
Marianne, you have shared your history with us and one of your current activities. Would you tell us what other things you're involved in now?
It is, as I said, I was very interested that first day when I was still able to participate in the meeting, to hear people's stories. And I thought to myself also that, in fact, I could say that my work has been very much in the line of the work of my family or my father, because my father was also in the church. I mean, for example, in the Theological Seminary and the Bible Society and all that. He was a leading figure. But to us, the theology and the literature have always been combined or joined. And perhaps that is why, at the moment, one of my most, the project which I am most interested in, and which is probably a little strange to some people, is that I am trying to uncover again the poet and the pastor whom I quoted in the beginning, Kai Munk. And actually I brought what is a kind of biography about him, because he was a very great playwright. He was the foremost playwright of the 30s in Denmark, and then later he was the priest who really lit the spark, or whose death lit the spark to Danish resistance getting going. But of course he was a very controversial figure, because at that time people could not understand that priests could write plays and also be in the resistance. And one project which I very much like to do now is to write something about him, and to bring him again to the attention of the people of today, because perhaps some people find it rather extraordinary to call him a liberation theologian, but of course if you see the context of his life and death, he really was. And as you probably have noticed, I always like to break certain cliches. So why should an Asian woman always write about Asian women and Asian theology? And I think you may have seen the film Out of Africa. So I thought if Karen Blixen can write a novel about, and call it Out of Africa, not that I'm putting myself on the same level as Karen Blixen, but I see no reason why I should not write a book or whatever on liberation theology out of Denmark. Well, my remarks about Denmark before, I hope you understood the spirit in which I said it. I I probably forgot to mention that I lived for several years in Scandinavia. I lived in Sweden for 5 years, and lately, in this whole past summer, I was also in Scandinavia. So whatever remarks I made about Denmark as an example of the Scandinavian countries is not to pull them down, but just to show you also the anguish which I myself and many of the people there feel when they see the disintegration, really, of so-called Christian values. But so this project, writing about this Danish pastor, would be one, and another one which I'm already engaged in is the translation of Norwegian literature. It's not so complicated as you might think. I mean, they are Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian are very close to each other. So if you speak one, then you can easily read at least the others. So Norwegian is no problem at all to me. But these are the two projects which I'm most engaged in, and I know it is a pity, like some people said, that I cannot do more about Asian theology, but in view of the fact that in the past years I have really tried and come up against so many obstacles, or, just did not get the, how do you call it, the support, the supportive structures, I felt that probably it is time to do, to do things in a different way right now. And I also thought some remark which Joel made before about the third world. I put that quotation about the third estate on purpose because as you see in the quotation about the third estate, the third estate meant everything, but was unable to really do anything in the French society before the French Revolution. And this is where I see the third world, whether it is geographical or women or oppressed minority or whatever, or the Pacific Rim. This is where I see us to be. And if I may elaborate, the term third world came from a conference in Algiers prior to the conference in Bandung, Afro-Asian conference in Bandung, and it is precisely taken from the French language and the French history, because the first estate, as you know, was the church, the second estate was the royalty, and the third estate were the people. And so in this case, the parallel was that the first world is the capitalist countries, the second is the socialist, and the third were us, the ones who nobody ever pays attention to, or now it's called the non-aligned movement. So, I mean, if you want to know what kind of work I'm involved in, that is mainly, like I said, in some articles where I was interviewed, I have seen myself described as a social critic. So probably that is the project which at the moment I'm most engaged in, criticizing vocally or through other ways the situation in our society. And as those of you who were present a few days ago when we were making the introductions may remember, I was not joking when I said that I am on the top of the blacklist of theologians in Indonesia, because I really am. So if we were in Indonesia right now, you would be in trouble. Because, because this, what Joel was saying, also this blackout of history has also happened to me. But I think it's time for me to stop talking and let Joel also say something. Were there? Oh, I thought, did you have a question?
I think we've gone beyond time,
Okay.
so I'll go.
Perhaps we could start with your question in the morning.
Just a point of information. There's a book written, it's edited by Leonardo Boff and Virgil Elizondo, 1492 to 1992, The Voice of the Victims. There is a chapter here about Abiyala. Abiyala is a name, the name given to the Americas by the Panamanian Kuna Indians. And it means ripe land, big motherland, land of blood.
Oh, God. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, we may all be in trouble anyway, but we're very glad we had this opportunity to hear each of you this evening. We'll gather again tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock over in the Davis Community Center, and sleep well. Good night.
Yes, Arturo Chacon is a great hero. Well, you must be feeling somewhat.